Good.
So thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Yeah.
So July 11th was a very big day. You released your 50th anniversary celebration of The Lamb Stands Up live at the Royal Albert Hall. So
Yes.
so why now celebrate the 50 years of that album?
Well, it's to try and celebrate its anniversary and the fact that I've done so many. Excuse the noise. There's this. It's the flyover. It's the busiest time for planes here. There's also a hurricane blowing at the moment here. You can see
Okay.
the leaves going here. Um, I basically did. I did the whole of Foxtrot live. I did the whole of Sunny England live. I did most of Wyndham Wuthering live. And now I thought it was time to do the Lamb, especially with the expectation of box sets and anniversaries. And I find that Genesis themselves, I should say ourselves, often miss those anniversaries. So I wanted to be out there to celebrate it live myself, but not the entire album. My version is 9 tracks from that album, and there are other things as well, like Foxtrot. I'm doing the whole of Supper's Ready, 3 tracks from Circus and the Night Whale, for instance. So you've got an idea of my priorities there.
Right, right. So how much pressure do you feel when you know that those shows are being recorded?
Are being heard. Well, there was a sense of pressure doing it at the Royal Albert Hall because whenever I've done the Royal Albert Hall, there is always the sense that every great performer in the world has been on that stage.
Right.
It's an iconically famous venue. It's London's most famous venue, so you've got to take that into account. And but once it started going, I started to pick up that feeling that the whole crowd were going with it, and what you might not get the sense from the film of it, that the audience were on their feet at the end of every number. The camera failed to capture that, but that's what it was. So it was kind of like encores from the word go throughout the whole show, not just with the Genesis stuff, but also the other stuff from the other bands that I'd worked with.
Right. So, do you remember that first time you stepped foot in the Royal Albert Hall where you just like, I can't believe I'm here of all places?
Do you mean as a performer or as a kid?
Well, first as a kid and then going
Yeah.
from
Well,
audience
I
to
think the first time
performer.
I was there, I was 17 or 18, and I was there to see Dvorak's New World Symphony. So it was a classical piece, and the cheapest seats were up in the gods, right at the top, and that's what we had. I was with friends who were introducing me to the place, so that was quite an experience. The place was amazing. But when you're up in the gods and you look down on the stage, it seems like a very long way away. It's a long way down. But in those days they didn't have the acoustic baffles up, so everything used to swirl around. Whenever I saw rock stuff or country stuff there, every snare drum would sound like a gunshot until they tamed it down with those mushroom shaped baffles in the ceiling. That made
Right.
quite a bit of difference.
So has there been during your journey as a musician, has there been any other, arena, concert hall where you're like, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe as a kid I never would have thought I made it here.
Well, funnily enough, I remember doing Madison Square Garden with Genesis. Now, it was either 77 or 76, but we were essentially doing the show that became Seconds Out. So I remember starting off with Squonk. And again, from the first note, the whole of the audience were on their feet. So that was extremely reassuring because backstage it had been very touch and go. The union threatened to pull the show unless they were bribed with $16,000. Like Welcome to New York. So there was certainly that. So it was immensely reassuring. A that the concert took place, and B, that it was so important to the crowd.
Right. So what was that first impression of being in New York City, coming all the way overseas, being like the biggest city in the world, essentially?
Yeah. Well, now the guy who was our tour manager who worked for Charisma Records, which Genesis was signed to, amongst many other bands. He was staying at the hotel. It was the Gorham Hotel, and he said, "I don't want to worry you, but there was a gunfight in the lobby, and police were chasing guys up the stairs when I was just checking in. So just to warn you, uh, relax and enjoy New York City." So literally on the way into New York City, because there've been so many stories of the violence and everything, I was literally sort of almost afraid to look out of the window. Is that sort of feeling? I'm going, is it all right? Like that. And I arrived, and of course, in those days, people used to smoke on flights. So by the time you arrived after a 5 or 6 hour flight, uh, I often used to arrive with a cold or a cough. Pete used to lose his voice, um, and then, of course, in the hotel, I hadn't experienced heating that you couldn't turn off, and windows I think that you couldn't open. So uh, I got flu straight away. I was not a well man, but hey, I was only 21 or 22. It was a long time ago.
Right. So you did mention Genesis, and it's so hard to not mention them when it comes to your story. So
Sure.
what was that day like when you put your advertisement in Melody Maker and then you finally got that call from Phil Collins?
It was actually Peter Gabriel, funnily
Okay.
enough. It was, well, it wasn't as if from one day to the next I put an ad in and they answered it. I'd been advertising myself for 5 years, and then suddenly I got a phone call from Peter Gabriel because I'd worded the ad in a very idealistic kind of way. And At the time, I wasn't sure if I'd heard of Genesis or not. It was a band that was doing clubs at that point. So there was another band called Quintessence, and I thought Genesis, Quintessence. Have I heard of them? Have I seen them on TV? Um, I wonder what they're like. Um, so I wasn't at all phased by it. I didn't think this is my big break. I thought, oh, it's just another day. These guys have phoned me up. I don't really know what they're like. I've been recommended to listen to certain tracks on their album before I'd even met the band. No one sent me an album. It was like down to the local record shop, which doesn't exist anymore because record shops don't in the main. And But in the heart of Chelsea, at Sloane Square, there was a W.H. Smith's, and downstairs they had records and listening booths, and of course it would have been a vinyl the first time round. So I was standing in there with my brother, who's 5 years younger, and we were listening to Trespass, and we'd been recommended the track Stagnation because I'd used the word stagnation or stagnant musical forms in my ad, and so I thought there was a bit of synchronicity with that. We listened to the track and we weren't sure if we were listening to guitars or keyboards, and that was a very good thing. The confusing sound palette of Genesis wasn't always immediately recognizable. You could be listening to guitar. You could have been listening to a small group of harpsichord players. It was very different. It was a case of Genesis. Whenever there was a guitar-based tune, it invariably meant that it would be based on a series of acoustic 12 strings and electric 12 strings. We used to have these marathon tuning sessions before every gig, and that was in the days before stroboscopic tuners and little things that clip onto the end of your guitar. So sometimes the tuning sessions went on for 2 hours before every gig, and we were tuning up to an organ that wouldn't always be stable, or a mellotron that certainly wouldn't be stable. And so tuning was a real issue between numbers, and that's why Peter Gabriel developed the art of telling these stories between songs. Sometimes those stories went on for 10 minutes whilst the marathon tuning sessions continued. It seems unthinkable now.
Right, right. So what was it like to be in that band with all those different personalities between you, Peter Gabriel, Phil Collins, just the collaborations that went on there?
Well, I was very young. I didn't have a girlfriend at the time. I'd had a number of girlfriends, and then in a way, I'd sidelined my whole orientation to try and concentrate on music. I didn't want to be distracted by girlfriends who would have other agendas other than the fact that I would be rehearsing all hours of the day and night. And so I was a kind of fish out of water because everyone else seemed to have a girlfriend, at least one. And Phil seemed to have 7 or 8 girlfriends that he rotated and what have you. Because, of course, he'd been on stage as a kid. He acted the part in Oliver. He'd been the Artful Dodger. I remember going to a fancy dress party that he organized when he was still living at home with his parents, and he was dressed up as a Chinaman, a sort of Fu Manchu outfit. And there were all these girls there, and they were all either ex or to be rotated, to be current girlfriends again. So he was a huge success with the ladies, and this was very, very early days. Pete seemed to be in a stable relationship, as did Tony, and who else was there? Mike. No, Mike had a steady girlfriend. That was it. They were all lovely girls that they were involved with. So I think they all thought I was gay because I didn't have a girlfriend, and I'm not. But I was, so dedicated to music. I thought I've just got to concentrate on music. There mustn't be any distractions here.
Right.
So girls really went by the wayside for quite some time, and I guess I needed to do that.
Okay. Especially
That's
in
just.
order. I'm sorry.
I was very serious. I didn't smile much. I had a beard, glasses. I was sort of under a welter of hair and beard and glasses. I could have been anyone underneath it. It was a disguise
Right.
that made me look older than my years. Or so I thought. I wanted to come across as a man of experience who knew where he was headed idealistically, in order to be able to shape a band and say, well, I think it needs to be this and it needs to be this. So there were certain things I wanted to change with Genesis. I wanted to change their orientation because much of the shows the band did, certainly the ones that I saw before I joined, they were largely acoustic in nature. And I thought, well, you've got to grab an audience from the word go. It's got to be something stunning from the word go. So I had to work on everyone like Chinese water torture to get my way with certain things, to
Right.
get my way with the mellotron, to get my way with the light show. And sometimes there was resistance to that, but I knew that we had to change in order to really grab an audience. Of course, Pete ran with the ball very much because he started to depict what was on the front of one or two of the albums, and the fact that he had that sense of theatricality meant that it complemented the ideas that I had for the visual look, the presentation of the band. I realized that was terribly important. So we started to get front covers on magazines because Pete was prepared to dress up in all manner of things and shave his head in a strange way. And It was absolutely crucially important to the band's development. You can't really minimize that. You need to have someone. I think a band starting out needs to have a front man who's either very handsome or very funny or very theatrical or can be the main focus. I think unless you come on like a band of semi jazzers with lots of virtuosity, but even then you need a visual focus, which is a light show that's going to be terribly precise along with it. Because in those days, bands used to come on, and it was still the era of Pink Floyd at Covent Garden, covered with oil slides all over, and the stage would look an absolute mess with all that sort of stuff. It would be hugely inappropriate. We'd be playing little 12-string passages, tinkly stuff, and they'd be bombarding us with Strohs and World War III from the lights. So we needed to have our own stuff there. If you want to get ahead, get a light show.
Right. So I wanted to backtrack just a little bit. So your new album that came out, do you
Yeah.
remember? And it came out all different formats. There were CD versions, streaming and in vinyl. Do you remember that first time that you went down to the record store and you picked up a vinyl and you saw on the back your name and what was the reaction like when you saw your name on a vinyl record?
Well, the very first time, I think, I seem to remember seeing, of course, there was Nursery Crime first of all, but then there was no photographic evidence of who people were in the band. It wasn't until Foxtrot in 1972 that there was a picture of everybody. So there's me looking very serious, head down, as ever, concentrated, very serious. But it was kind of gratifying to know that the album was taking off and that it became number one in Italy. A damn good album. And yeah, that was a thrill. I mean, it was a bit of a shock the first time someone said to me, "Can I have your autograph?" I wasn't really ready for that.
Okay.
Having just signed pre-orders of the latest live album, The Lamb Stands Up at the Albert Hall, I've signed about 3,000 of those pre-orders. So I do get heartily sick of signing my own name. You thought you wanted to see your name in lights, but little did you think that it was like being at school where they would punish you by making you write out lines. I mean, at my school, my grammar school, it was such and such and such is a habit I am determined to conquer. So they had you. They tried to wear you down with all this kind of stuff, and I thought one day I shall be writing my own name. Little did I realize that the more popular you get, you sell 1 million albums. These days, people want 1 million signatures, and they are all individual. And it does take a while,
Right.
to get it done. So be careful what you wish for.
So do you remember that, or actually now, do you still get mesmerized when you see your name on the marquee and you're like, I don't know who's gonna come out and see it, and you walk out on stage and you just see a sea of people out there? Do you still get that oh my God moment?
Yeah. I mean, I think that many musicians are the same. Um, Once you're up and running, you hope that it's not just a complete flash in the pan, and that the following year there will still be a record contract and there will still be an audience. So these days, I still get that feeling, oh, yeah, right, okay, yeah, it's sold out at the Albert Hall. We got away with it, yeah, but you mustn't come back too many times to the same venue. So we tend to leave it 2 years between each tour to create a need, if you like, a need to go and see something that you didn't see last year because it was the best thing you saw since sliced bread the last time you went to go see it. So I do invest as much as I can in having a great band who are able to live up to all of the Genesis classics and also the solo stuff where they get to show their chops, their abilities, perhaps even more. The Genesis stuff can be quite constraining, even though they do, arguably the best versions that have ever been done of those songs, and of course PA's sounds and the very players, and the fact that there's all this experience means that there's a level of precision that wasn't there in the early days. The ideas were there
Right.
in the early days, but in terms of the execution, the precision, the guys that I play with there and sing with, they are extraordinary.
Right. So how much of your day do you think you spent each day just getting ready for the Lamb, whether it was, meetings, sitting in production, post-production, making sure every little nook and cranny wasn't overlooked? I mean, how
Mhm.
much effort gets put into something as extraordinary as this release?
Well, there are 9 tracks from The Lamb. It's pretty much the same as every other uh, thing that I do. The hardest thing is personal rehearsals before I even sit down with the band. So, um, as an example, I would say to you, when we were doing Selling England by the Pound, there's a track on that called The Battle of Epping Forest. Now, that requires the singer to be a number of different characters. There might be 20 different voices that the singer's using because it was Peter Gabriel's fantasy at that time, having read the news story of East End gangs getting together to slug it out in Epping Forest. And some of these characters are religious, some of them are camp, some of them are Cockney. And Nad said to me, it took him 3 months just to get that one track together because he's Swedish American. So yes, he speaks English fluently, but it's really American English, and that's not the same as English, and it's very colloquial. So I think The Lamb is probably easier in a sense because of the idea of Americana as evinced by English guys, of course. Um, so I would say, yes, the hardest part is rehearsing individually and then coming together for about a week.
Right.
We usually rehearse for about a week. Um, it it takes a while, for sure. Yeah.
Right, right. So then backtracking just a little bit, year
Hmm.
2010 rolls around and finally the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame comes knocking.
Yes.
The big introduction. So what was that day like when you finally were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
Well, the rest of the Genesis guys tend not to get phased by things. They're quite sort of whatever levels of success they've enjoyed individually, collectively, etc. They're quite stiff upper lip about this sort of stuff. Very British, um, and so I noticed that they were all dressed in DJs and what have you. But it did say that artists didn't really need to do that. So I wore it was either a suit or something with a dark shirt and a tie and all this sort of stuff to try and look formal, but not as if, I was being invited to the White House or something. Which indeed I think they were at some point.
Okay.
But then, the evening started off pretty stiff and formal. And then as more and more performers were inducted, the evening became really emotional and very interesting where you saw people, there were people that I'd grown up listening to. There were older people than us. We weren't young. Um, so that was hugely interesting. And it became very emotional. And people started to talk to each other. And I was meeting Graham Nash for the first time and Jimmy Cliff. And
Oh wow.
you're looking across and there's Michael Douglas and God knows what, going on. So yeah, star-studded night. Yeah, amazing. Eric Burden, ABBA were being inducted the same night. So that was, yeah, it was a big deal. And I could see Phil, who wasn't well at the time, particularly the night before when we'd had dinner. He was on his feet, he was clapping, he wanted to be on that stage, wanted to be part of it. Carole King was being inducted. They were inducting, and still do, writers who are, posthumously, most famously. I mean, I was working with Chris Squire at the time from Yes, and we were doing an album together. And he said, "Oh, I'd really like to go." And I tried like crazy. There literally weren't any seats available. I think he thought I wasn't trying hard enough, but I really was. I think you had to spend something like $3,000 to get a seat or
Wow.
whatever, and so I kind of made up for it by saying to the press, because after you do one or two things in the pictures and what have you, you sort of meet the press on a platform before it's the main thing or after the main thing, and after you've done your speech or whatever. And I said I thought that Yes ought to be inducted, and indeed they were subsequently, because we were the first so-called progressive act to be inducted. And I was thrilled to see that the Paul Butterfield Blues Band were inducted after the event. Now, the Brits aren't really fully cognizant of the power of the Butterfield Blues Band, but that was really quite something. I was even recording a harmonica today myself, because I'm a harmonica player too. But Butterfield, I think, was the king of the harmonica as far as I'm concerned, and that would have included Mike Bloomfield, who also worked with Dylan, who was an incredible guitarist and was Dylan's favorite guitarist.
Gotcha. So
Um,
you did beat me to my next question just slightly. I was going to say
sure.
around the same time you were working with Chris Squire
Yes.
on a record called Squawk It. So how
Yeah.
did those initial conversations go when you were like, do you want to jump in the studio? Do you want to try something?
Well, he was looking for someone to play on a Christmas album of his. He was doing an album of what do you call it? Christmas carols,
Hmm.
with a choir and with a rock band. And I believe he'd asked Steve Howe to do it, and Steve Howe had turned him down. Then he asked me via an email, and I thought, what a chance to work with Chris Squire. Who wouldn't? I told Chris what a huge fan I was of his playing and the band, and so there was an aspect of Genesis and Yes coming together. Not always for the first time, because I'd worked with Steve Howe in GTR, and I'd also worked on Pete Banks's album, his first one, along with Jan Ackerman and various other people, John Wetton, who I was to work with extensively as well later on. Yeah, it's amazing to have worked shoulder to shoulder with some of these guys who are no longer with us. I'm still here.
That you are, and I feel like in every photo that I see of you, you always have by my standards, the most classic rock guitar around, a Les Paul guitar. Um, how did those guitars do you feel differ from others?
Well, of course, yes, it was another boyhood dream, as well as playing the Albert Hall, was to have, to own a Les Paul and a Marshall stack. I mean, that was it. I'd seen people take me to heaven with that. Um, I did acquire a Les Paul. I had a number of them stolen over the years, as did Eric Clapton. And these days, live, I don't take my Les Pauls with me, because I know that someone's going to steal it. I use Fernandez guitars, which have the Les Paul shape, but they have the sustainer pickup,
Hmm.
and that alters the sound quite a lot. It's a great facility. I was recording with one this very day, funny enough, because I'm working with Jonas downstairs. When we stop, I carry on with him. That's me.
Gotcha, gotcha. So, you know, you, between the when all is said and done, you kind of picked off some of my questions that I had. So, was there
Okay.
anything that I didn't touch on, anything that I didn't maybe ask that you wanted to add?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I would say, if I was to describe my whole orientation towards music, I've become more open with time, and I learned to appreciate classical music. I learned to appreciate Andres Segovia and Jimi Hendrix in my lifetime. So, one was a Baroque master, the other one was a blues master, and how wonderful to have been influenced by both and to have recorded some of the same material,
Right.
the Bach pieces, and in Hendrix's case, it was the late great John Wetton who taught me into doing All Along the Watchtower live with him, and I've used that as a stalwart if ever there's someone who looks jam worthy. Um, there is a version of that with both the late great Chris Squire and John Wetton when we were on Cruise to the Edge together doing that very tune. Um, yeah, it's I miss my friends,
Right.
and I love the music and the times that we shared.
Right. Right. And absolutely, I mean, you're going to be back in the New York area in October, returning to upstate New York, the New York metro area, New York
Yeah.
City. So very great opportunities for fans to come out and see you. Was there any message
Yeah.
to the fans that you want to say before the shows?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to be talking about New York, I lost my fear of New York years and years ago. I spent so much time there, and of course, I always used to go see Ian MacDonald, late of Crimson and Foreigner fame, who again is no longer with us. But so it felt really strange to go to New York and not see Ian.
Right.
Ian would always come to the gig. He always encouraged me when I was very young, before I was first truly professional, and I always loved him and adored him, and thought that his orientation towards the pan-genre approach of early King Crimson was absolutely vital to the development of music. Um, and I don't think he's ever received the credit that's due um, for being so outstanding in that band. He's the guy who wrote the theme tune for them. This is it. Anyway, I look forward to coming to New York, of course.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Let me there.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down and talking to us. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you. All the
Take care.
best.
Have a great
Thanks
rest
a
of your
lot.
day.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Cheers, Michael. All the best, mate. Bye bye.